A database cannot draw conclusions. A line that appears in Hyouka as early as episode 1. While it sounds like a genuinely thought out catchphrase at the start, it's a representation of who Fukube Satoshi is. At first it's his armor, then it's an excuse, and finally it's a scar he no longer needs to show.
それに、データベースは結論を出せないんだ。言うと思った。
At the start of Hyouka, this line sounds so bright and cheerful. It was used in a way that suggested exactly that. In episode 1, Satoshi only says it as a way to get Oriki involved in the locked room mystery. Every other time Satoshi being a database has come up, it was in the context of him being generally knowledgeable about the world around him. Which is exactly who I thought Fukube Satoshi was. A bright, cheerful teenager who has his toes in a multitude of things. Someone who had a ton of knowledge about a lot of different things and always had answers to any questions. A jack of all trades. In the early episodes of Hyouka, Satoshi was the one to give all the relevant information and Oriki was the one to put it all together and solve the mystery. Every time Oriki solved a mystery, it was met by a proud and positive reassurance from Satoshi.
いやー、見事見事。さすがに絵のモチーフに使ったなんて想像もつかなかったよ。いやー、なかなかお見事だったよ、宝太郎。なるほどだ。
またオレキが信じられない。
It really was a beautiful duo, and that's who Satoshi was to me. A cheerful database. That wasn't the whole picture though. We soon realize how Satoshi sees himself. In episode 8, we see Satoshi say that he doesn't have a special talent for anything. Even the thing he had a pride in, being a database, he didn't think he could actually excel at, which is then repeated again in the conversation he has with Oriki in episode 10. All he thought he could do was take an interest in a lot of different things without ever achieving mastery in anything he ever touches. No matter how much we as the audience saw him as a jack of all trades, it was becoming more and more obvious that he saw himself as a master of none. Which means that his patented database line wasn't born out of a deep self-understanding. It was a sign of resignation, one where he pretended that he didn't need to be a master of anything. Even if he did truly care about something, he was satisfied being the guy with a lot of tidbits of information and a lot of different interests. It's obvious from the later episodes of Hyouka why this wasn't the right path for him either. Satoshi did have things he cared about being good at. In fact, his whole personality in middle school was being overly competitive. Satoshi's persona at the start of the show was an attempt to change himself from competitive to easygoing. So presenting himself as a database who doesn't compete in anything wasn't a mature decision. It was a result of self-doubt and a fear of ever trying his hardest and failing. It was painful to try and change himself, but in Satoshi's mind, that was still going to be less painful than staring his incompetence and mediocrity in the face after he falls short. That being said though, just because we see the nature of this line now doesn't mean that it was a bad tool. Satoshi's new outlook on life was his armor. It was his way of extracting the most out of his own life. All he had to do was sacrifice a small portion of who he really is. It's a path of low resistance and it means that he can enjoy his life without the stress of competing and failing. It's this very armor that gave him the robust persona we saw in the early episodes. It would have been his ticket to living a fulfilling life if it was built on a real understanding. Unfortunately, as we see, it wasn't. In the film arc, we see Satoshi actively being invested in mysteries. This was an important piece of his character. It's one of the first times we see his armor being a fake one. He does have an interest he truly cares about. We even get to see Satoshi being good at mysteries. He was one of the members actively involved in debunking the theories presented to them, and his knowledge put together with his own deductions is how he rejected Oriki's theory right at the end of the arc. As we soon find out, the thing he was lacking wasn't ability, it was a confidence in himself. This was the first time the armor became apparent. Satoshi was forcing himself to hold back and not compete and pretended that he was happy. The school festival arc is where this all changes. The reason Satoshi was fine not competing all this time now became a painful reminder of why he thought that in the first place. This arc was home to Oriki's finest moment in the show, and it was also home to Satoshi's worst. Everything in this arc starts with one small misconception. Items started getting stolen from different clubs. As the rumors of this incident spread, we see Satoshi getting more and more interested. This is what he'd been waiting for. Satoshi convinced himself that this wasn't the kind of mystery that Oriki could solve. There were just too many suspects. Narrowing it down to one person would be impossible. This was finally a mystery he believed only he could solve.
宝太郎向きじゃないこの事件の真相を僕の手で解き明かす。宝太郎、10文字は僕が捕まえてみせるよ。
This was his own green light. He stripped off his armor and focused his entire attention on catching the culprit. What's even better is that he even stopped being a database. This arc was one where Satoshi didn't just hand out information like he usually does. He actively withheld parts of information. He didn't want Oriki to know his plans, and he acted according to his own will. We see this when he goes to the magic show to try and catch the culprit in the act. If he had discussed the plan with anyone, he would have realized that his methodology was bad. There was no reason the culprit would steal anything during the magic show. He withholds information, tries his very hardest to find the culprit, and falls short. He is then forced to watch Oriki connect the dots from evidence he had dismissed. Everything Satoshi tried led to nothing, and everything he assumed turned out to be wrong. He was then forced to give up and place his expectations on Oriki. Not only that, he then had to watch as Oriki found the culprit amongst the thousands of people that attend their school. The same Oriki that Satoshi wanted to compete with and beat in this arc. It was an utter defeat.
こいつを忘れちゃいけなかった。データベースは結論を出せないんだ。
In this arc, this line becomes his excuse. It's his reminder to himself of his own mediocrity. It becomes a way for Satoshi to cope with his own failure. This arc was a painful reality check. When he says this line as a desperate attempt to cope with reality, he sounds broken. Even Ibara understands this and knows that there is nothing to be done. This arc in itself would have made Satoshi's journey beautiful, but what follows from here somehow makes it even better. What follows for Satoshi is the Valentine's Day episode. In this episode, Satoshi decides to delay his decision with Ibara by breaking her chocolate and hiding it in his bag. This caused a massive incident with Chitanda as a casualty, which Oriki was forced to navigate. When Oriki finally solves the case of the missing chocolates, we get to see the truth. This episode is when Satoshi's understanding of himself really shows.
違うね。僕は第一人者にはなれない。だけど、正確に言うなら僕はなろうとするのをやめたんだ。
This is the same line he says to Oriki in episode 8 and episode 10. The difference is, this time it wasn't said to protect himself. Satoshi isn't scared of failing anymore. He's past his failures. He actually understands the pain of losing, and he knows that winning isn't the thing that will fix him. As he says himself, the old me wanted to win for winning's sake. It was no fun, you know, winning after focusing so hard on winning. This conversation he has with Oriki isn't under the guise of his old armor. It's his real maturity. This bridge scene appears sad, but in reality it's a scene full of hope. Hope that Satoshi can find the change he's realized is the right answer for himself. There's an even smaller detail I really love. After the excuse to Ibara, the line "a database cannot draw conclusions" doesn't appear again. This is a feature of the new Satoshi. What was once his armor, then his excuse for failure, now becomes his scar. A scar that he doesn't need to show the world. He doesn't need people to hear the catchphrase. He doesn't need to justify changing his ways to himself. He can now finally move forward in his life. Satoshi's story in Hyouka is proof that hiding behind a catchphrase and running away from your true self only leads to everything coming crashing down. Even if Satoshi found maturity at the end of Hyouka, there was no doubt that his journey was a painful one. He is the same person he was trying to be at the start of Hyouka, only now he has a real understanding and he's walking a path to his own happiness. Thank you all for watching.